And that was a show of her work where she set up a portrait and then had the sitter walk out of it so that the camera was set to be focused on her. So then she took the picture where the background was out of focus. There were these blurry pictures, but they weren't blurry because, because she just purposely tried to make them blurry. They're blurry because of this concept that she had. And then soon after that, I was taking pictures of posters, portraits again, and I just spun the focusing ring and shot one out of focus. And I thought it looked really good. And so that's where it all started.
Why does a memory always seem a little blurry, slightly soft-edged when we look back in time? It feels like reality. It is familiar, but oddly also just beyond our grasp. Memories are places beyond the veil of presence and are wonderfully not so easily defined. Just thinking about this notion begins to lift us out of our day-to-day experience, like a balloon slipped from its tether, rising slowly, magically up into the blue. Today on the podcast, we're talking with Manhattan-based artist Bill Armstrong. He utilizes repurposed imagery, abstraction, simplification, and blur to create his art. The gorgeous images are startling in their presence. They serve as a beautiful invitation for us all to feel more deeply the emotional, transcendent nature of our lives. Join me now for this illuminating conversation with Bill. Be sure to look at his art. Go to arttolife.com and click on podcasts. I think you're going to find his work not only unforgettable, I can't stop thinking of them, about them, but also just so beautifully transporting. Let's go now. Welcome to Art to Life, a podcast for the creatively curious. My name is Nicholas Wilton, and each week I'll help you rediscover not just the art of your life, but the art in your life. Join me as we explore that perfect blue at twilight, the wild frontiers of art making, and the extraordinary joy of finding your way as you go. Bill, listen, thank you so much for joining us and jumping on this conversation today. Thank you.
Oh, certainly. My pleasure to be here. I'm thrilled.
Where are you exactly right now? Where's your studio and where do you work out of?
I moved out of the city to New Rochelle, and I work out of my apartment in New Rochelle.
And so, Bill, you're a photographer, but I know you do manipulations and paint and all kinds of things on your work, but give our audience a little background on, how you got into photography, or if you even consider yourself a photographer. You're working with mixed media. How did you kind of come into this?
I never thought I would be an artist when I was growing up. I never I don't know how to draw or paint or do anything like that. I used to make those little model planes, and I never was able to put them together properly. So that was never anything I wanted to do or was interested in. And I really wanted to be a writer, but mostly I didn't have anything. I didn't write. I just wanted to be, you know what I mean? I had this romantic idea of being a writer and, living in some cabin and writing, something, but I never really wrote that much. So I went to South America in 1974 or 75, and a friend of mine named Roger Frankton, who's a really great photographer, was a friend of mine from boarding school. He gave me like a crash course in photography because I thought I got a camera in order to go on this trip. And not everybody had a camera in those days. So I got a Canon, SLR and Kodachrome film. And he told me about, the, photographer's hour, like the golden light. He told me to underexpose by half a stop and, gave me the basic rundown on photography. And I took this camera on this trip and I got back and I had some pictures that, I sent them out to a lab. Somebody else did the real work, developed the slides and all that. And then all of a sudden I had some pretty good pictures. And I thought, wow, this is pretty easy. I could do this. So that's how it started. The next thing was that I was going to Boston University and I was studying art history. And so I had spent my whole time in college sitting in a darkened room looking at slides photographs of paintings, right? So when I picked up the camera, I think I had a really different idea of what one should do with it than, somebody else who hadn't done that.
Were you tempted to go into painting? I mean, because you studied it, you loved it, but,
No, I wasn't. No, I'm not. I don't have any of that, manual. I don't know how to draw. I never did. I took art history because, I thought I assumed I was going to be an English major because that's pretty much what I thought, normal people did when you went to college. And then I found out that in order to be an English major, you had to do like 4 courses reading Victorian novels. And this is like in, 70s. And that's not what I wanted to do, I was just still in 1960 in the 60s in my mind, and I was. So then I thought, well, maybe I should major in history. And then that seemed really dull. And I have to memorize a lot of facts. It seemed really not a good idea. So then art history popped up as an idea. And then that seemed really cool. All you have to do is sit around and look at slides. And I have a pretty good photographic memory. So it was kind of, it wasn't a big problem. The irony is that, how many years later, 30 years later, I ended up making a whole body of work about Renaissance art. So it actually was like, wow, that was a really great major I had, because I ended up actually using it in my life.
Yeah, no, totally. Like the breadcrumbs were there, of what you were going to do. That's amazing. So, I just can't believe your friend taught you, got you into this. What a gift, Yeah,
that was really cool. I actually, I just saw him for the first time in a long time. And he has a beautiful house in Maine. And I was there, and he had a gallery. He's made his house into a gallery, and it has these fantastic pictures of, Richard Pryor and Richard Avedon and all these really great portraits that he had done. And John Lennon. He had a big shoot.
Oh my God! Wow!
Just before Lennon died. So one of the last shoots. That's Roger Farrington. Really, really cool guy.
Wow. But your work, the blurring of it. So talk to us about what's going on with this. Your work it's very painterly. I just see images first. I don't think photography, which I love. But when did you start kind of finding this or get interested in this aspect of kind of blurring and more metaphorical?
Well, it's kind of, I have to talk about some other stuff in order to get there.
Yeah, please.
I was pretty much of a straight photographer, and I believed in all these rules about, you don't crop and you don't manipulate and all that stuff. And I don't know why, but I that was really the way I started off, that it was all about this capture of this moment and, all that stuff. And so I just did pretty straight photography, but I was influenced by Ernst Haas, and he had a lot of really good ideas about, color photography. So I was trying to make kind of more abstract things in nature and, stuff like that. And, I did some pretty good stuff. And then I was in Italy, and I saw these torn posters on the walls that were just unbelievable. And that's when I started doing posters, making found collage of posters. But again, by all these, by the straight rules that you couldn't crop it. And when you developed it, you showed the black line around the edge to show you hadn't cropped it. And it was still very much in that frame of traditional ideas about photography. And, I'd spent like a year working the color in a black and white darkroom. Again, my friend Roger taught me some printing. And, but then I was, doing only color slides. And so over the years, I just took a lot of pictures of, these found collages of juxtapositions of torn up posters, which, a million people have done. But I thought it was really pretty exciting.
Describe that. So the torn up posters, you're talking about a poster that was glued on a wall, like these in Italy, or, it's glued on a wall, then it's been torn off. And then is that what we're describing? Is that what you're describing?
Right. Yeah. So they were layered and they were torn. And then later people started defacing them and drawing on them or painting on them. Or, there's all sorts of sort of archaeological history to, what happens to these posters as they got, and it was a very rich thing, in Europe and also in New York and Soho, where they got really deep impasto-like layers of torn edges and stuff, and then all different colors, and then little bits of figures and words and things stuck together and juxtaposed so that it had some kind of narrative, story that you could, suss out of the mess.
Yeah.
And so that was really fascinating to me. And I knew that, I wasn't the only person doing it, but I kind of had this feeling if I did it better, that would be good. That would make it worthwhile. And in the end, I think it was kind of a dead end. I don't think it ever was really going to, go that far. But it kept me going for a really long time.
Were you, when you were saying, I'm going to do this better than anyone else, were you taking these prints? I mean, obviously they were prints, and then were you in galleries at this point? I mean, have you always been able to show your work in galleries, or were you doing some commercial work for, car companies? I mean,
I did some commercial work. I worked in restaurants. I took my work to art fair. I lived in Boston, Cambridge, Mass, and I took work to these, art fairs. Not like today's art fairs, but they're more craft fairs.
Yeah.
Booth. And then I had a really nice show in the jewelry store in downtown Boston. And then I had a show in suburbs where I grew up in a nice. In the halls of a performing arts center. I had a show there every year for a while with some other people, different stuff like that. It was pretty amateur, this is like before I moved to New York. I had no idea. I didn't know anything, right? I was in Massachusetts. Of course, but in 1987, I had a show of those at the Fogg Museum in the print room. So that was really cool. And this was the weird thing. Davis Pratt, who was the curator at the Fogg Museum, was a customer in the cafe that I was a waiter right down the street. And I kind of got to know him. And I showed him these pictures. He said, yeah, these are really cool. I'll put them up on the wall. So I actually had this little show in the print room of the Fogg Museum.
Wow.
So that was really, but that was just a strange, wonderful thing that happened.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Wow.
But I moved to New York in 91. Then I took color printing at ICP, and that was what changed everything, because then I could make my own prints. And I really got into it. But I was still doing posters. And then I did two different things with the posters, which actually were much better. One was I did portraits, which are called accidental portraits, and portraits that had been defaced, either by tearing or by people scribbling on them or something. And that was pretty cool. I kind of did them in the format of 4x5 dimensions, and tried to make them look like real portraits, except they were cut up and torn in ways. A lot of them, of course, are the models of beautiful women, and then they had these staples in them, this is like just when piercing was starting, where they'd have a little rip in their skin, and there was something kind of menacing and violent about it. At the same time, it was just paper, it was just.
Yeah.
So that was actually a pretty more interesting project. And I did another one, which I called Found Diptychs, where I just took a picture of a diptych in one frame of two posters next to each other, where there was some connection between the story and the two different posters. And that's really hard to explain without seeing them. But these were also pretty cool. And I had a really big show of these in a place called Uma Gallery, a wonderful guy, an Indian tailor, who was a tailor to high-end, Midtown or Upper East Side people in Manhattan. And he had this tailor shop on 57th Street between 5th and 6th or 6th and 7th. And he had this amazing space. And I had this huge show there of these posters. And I actually got a really nice review at the Village Voice.
Wow.
Of the portrait. So that was in 1997.
Yeah. So you're in New York now, starting to participate. Yeah.
So I was in New York, and I've been printing, and I was starting to, and I was, actually got somewhere. That was really, really cool. But right around that time, I was taking another printing course at ICP, Advanced Printing, and the teacher told us to go to MoMA and see the Uta Barth show. And that was a show of her work where she set up a portrait and then had the sitter walk out of it so that the camera was set to be focused on her. So then she took the picture where the background was out of focus. So you had to know what was going on to appreciate this. But so the idea was that, so anyway, there were these blurry pictures, but they weren't blurry because, because she just purposely tried to make them blurry. They're blurry because of this concept that she had. And they were very successful. She had a show in MoMA. And, I kind of didn't even really like it, but I thought it was pretty interesting. And then soon after that, I was taking pictures of portraits again, and I just spun the focusing ring and shot one out of focus. And I thought it looked really good. And so that's where it all started.
Well, there's something that's so interesting that happens when an image becomes blurry. It no longer becomes specific and it becomes bigger than itself. And there's like an element of time in there. And can you speak to that a little bit? You write about this so beautifully on your site. It's almost like the less information we have, the more we have in a way.
Right. Well, there are a lot of different ideas. I mean, one is that a blurred image that is, I guess, ephemeral by definition is, referencing some more spiritual world or spiritual space than, the quote regular world. So there is that sense of a parallel world or parallel universe, which doesn't, it's like reminds us of our world, but it's different, and it's bodiless. It's more about spirit. So that's like one whole, aspect of it. And then there's this thing, the idea that blurring is something about memory. And I think it's kind of weird. I mean, I think it makes sense in a way, but it's also weird because memories aren't really blurry, but they're indistinct in some other way.
Yeah. It's almost like the memory is blurry when we remember it,
Right. But if you think of your childhood home, it's not blurry when you conjure up that image. But there's something that does make sense about the idea that blur refers to memory or to dreams. By the same token, when you think of the dream you had last night, if you remember it, it wasn't blurry. But at the same time, it seems like blur is a useful metaphor for a dream state or a memory. Even though that's not really true. So that's kind of interesting in itself.
Very interesting. And I bet it's universal, It's amazing. It's like the human being just feels that way. When I'm looking at, one of your apparition images right now, and it feels distant and not quite, like reachable. And I think maybe that's where the dream, the dream world, the veil is thinner and we can kind of see something, but it's just out of reach. So maybe that's what the blurriness comes from, a distance, maybe. I'm not sure.
Well, I like that out of reach thing because that makes it something that's desirable, that you want to get more of it, that you want to grasp at it, and that you're kind of left unable to do that. So that's like, that kind of seems like a good ploy for drawing people in. Is to give them something that they want more out of it. They want to get more, and it's not really necessarily even there. So that's a cool idea. Then there's the whole idea of time, that somehow that blurring refers to things in the past, which I think also makes sense, because that is actually more pretty sensible ideas. That whatever we think we know about history is actually only a pretty blurry version of whatever history really was. So I think that that's a good another way that blur is interesting because it can represent passage of time.
Well, absolutely, and it's interesting because those posters that you were interested in, they had the element of time because there's someone scribbled on it and they tore it off and somebody glued another print on there and put, like those layers evoke that patina. Patina is time, it comes from the passage of time. So it's interesting that was, something that you were glomming onto earlier, that these definitely have time in them. All the work has time as one of the main aspects of your art.
So you just remind me of another important thing is that, I was doing relatively just sort of normal photography, one would say. And then I did this other thing of taking the pictures of the posters, which seemed, different. And that was, working with found images that other people had made. And I remember that Susan Sontag said something about how all the pictures have already been taken. And that's something that is apocryphal and certainly not true. There was tons of great work made after she said that. But I took that seriously, that it was foolish to go out and try to take pictures of the regular pictures in the regular world, that was something that had already been done. So that when I was taking pictures of the posters, I thought that was something different. And when I'm rephotographing things blurry, then again, that's, using already existing images, which seemed to be like a practice that she had suggested, inadvertently suggested by saying that all the pictures had already been taken. So that was another aspect of my work, because I've not taken a photo, kind of like an original picture that isn't of something that somebody else didn't already make since, I don't know when, long time.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. How I love this. You're finding, tell me how you create your art.
But let me get back to let me finish off with the blur, because it's pretty cool, because it actually there are 5 different things to talk about.
Okay, good.
The other idea is that, this does get to my process of making a collage, collecting some things, photographs or painted things or whatever, and then taking a picture of them blurry, that the edges of the collage disappear and that they look like they're integrated images. And a lot of people think that there's things that I did in the studio with gels, something like that. So that there's this belief that it's somehow tethered to reality and the expectation of photography, when in fact it's just not really true at all. That it's just this, a little collage that's been blurred. It's got nothing to do with our ideas about a real photograph.
So what you're saying is that there's a clue or the indication that this is real because of the edges, the film, is that what you're saying? Because of the lack of the edges you don't see that it's a collage. So it looks like it's something yes,
that exists in the world. And that, David Leventhal had this great thing that he said, that something like that when you believe something's real, but at the same time know that it can't be, that it frees you up emotionally to respond on a different level. That it's kind of, it kind of knocks out the ego and you get more to the id or more to emotional response in that confusion. And so I think that's a really interesting and deep point that hopefully that some of these my work can achieve. That when you're really uncertain as do you really think that this is real, but it couldn't be. That puts you in a position where you experience it differently, maybe on a more emotional level.
Yes, that's a beautiful idea. And there's just, I'm looking at your work, and there's a familiarity and a newness all simultaneously occurring. Your series, Falling Through History, I know that feeling, but I've never thought of it as this yellow picture with this figure. But there's this feeling. There's a universality to the work. How are you doing that, or why? How do you think that's happening? Because you're pulling that off. It's so powerful.
Well, the Falling Through History is a different process in a way. Well, it's similar, but it's a different process than most of the other series. That most of them, I simply take, for instance, a colored background and a cutout figure, and put them on the floor and take a picture of them blurry. A lot of times, if you look at film noir or the figures, that there's some more elements involved. There are other pieces that might be 2 or 3 different things glommed together, but that really relies on the blur to transform it into something else. But the Falling Through History, I start off the same way. I cut out a Xerox of some figure from art history and put it on a colored paint it and pull it on a colored background. But then the visual effect is created by moving the camera. So I do a long exposure, I shake the camera. And some of the camera's actually falling down. The camera's actually falling.
Oh, I love that. And are you just moving the camera by hand, or is it like, do you have to
just
control?
by hand. And one of the things about this is that I was in the analog world for a really long time. And mostly because I like the printing better. There's a lot of printing problems with blur, that many of which have been resolved in the current iterations of printers. There still are some problems, but I stayed in analog for a really long time. But so this was a project that that had to be digital, because you had to take so many exposures because you have no idea what you're doing. You're just like shaking the going like this with the camera, just moving it around. And it would be very laborious to do and expensive to do with film, because you can do it for an hour and not even have any image anyway. So it really would lend itself to using a digital technology where you can see after you take 20 exposures, and then you look through and you go like, oh, the one that was like 2 seconds and it was moved this way actually created an image you could actually see.
And then do you do like, I'm gonna explore that exposure and that movement 20 more times, or are you just
then you do it another 20 or 40 times, and then you get one that it's that usual story. It's like the old thing about how, like, if you, no matter how static the thing is you're just shooting, if you shoot 35 pictures, one will be better than the others,
Yes.
You shoot a whole roll. One will be somehow better than the others.
And so then you riff off of that one and go further.
Yeah, and then of course you can't do it all the same way. But then you start to get some, understanding that if it's a 2-second exposure, then you got to really move the camera at a certain rate.
So really for you, you're just experimenting every time. You're just playing with this, but you can't predict totally. I mean, I guess you have a sense of it, but I mean, how long does this process take of you? Can it happen on the first go, or is it like, weeks of playing around with this?
Well, when I was just doing the analog stuff, I would usually, what I do is I gather a bunch of figures and a bunch of backgrounds in 2 piles, and then I'd kind of mix and match them on the floor and shoot. And I'd usually shoot like 8 or 9 rolls of film in maybe an hour and a half or something. And it was pretty, it's pretty gestural. I would just kind of randomly move things around until I got something I liked and click, then do something else and click, But I knew what shutter speed to use, and I had some idea of how blurry was going to be the right amount of blur through, some prior trial and error. And it was, I'm surprised now when I look back, like, how could I even know that was going to work out? Because, there's nothing, you can't see what you're doing, really. I mean, you're just looking through the camera, it's all blurry. How can you know if you blow it up for like 40 by 50 inches, it's going to be the right amount of blur? But it turned out that I sort of got a system that worked. But it's interesting, if you look at my early figures way back in the archive, you'll see they're much blurrier than, say, the film noir. And I don't even necessarily even know that until way after it was done. I looked back, wow, this isn't nearly as blurry. So, there are different amounts of blur.
Yes. Yeah, which gives it a completely different feeling. And
the shooting process was pretty under control. And I did it on the floor in my apartment in front of a glass door, because I had a little balcony. And I had a set place that I would shoot, and I had pretty much set exposures. And originally I shot with the camera set on infinity, which is for distance, the focus all the way, to the most depth of field. And that worked. But that, as I used the larger format cameras, that changed. And then I had to use different settings. So, it's kind of a miracle to me that I actually was able to not, only use like 10 rolls of film instead of like 500 to get somewhere.
What kind of camera do you use now? I mean, every friggin' summer there's a new camera that comes out. You must be going crazy.
I use, like a Canon Mark II or Mark IV. I don't even know but it's pretty old at this point, and doesn't really, doesn't matter much. But, one of the wonderful things, Blur is very forgiving.
Yes.
And it's not, it really doesn't matter. Resolution, none of this stuff matters. The thing on the other end, the printing, is where it all really matters. And the problem is banding, is that you don't get the smooth transitions.
Are you still printing your prints, or do you have labs do it? Or
no? Well, I print. I now have a printer that prints 1620 images, 1722 paper. That's the largest practical size printer to have at home. Well, unfortunately, it's a weird thing to go from 1620 to 2024. You have to get this huge, mammoth printer, and it's only a few inches bigger. I don't understand it.
Yeah, I got really into printing. Color printing. I mean, I just went down such a rabbit hole, probably 10 or 15 years ago. And I scanned my own artwork, but I did it in a way. I had these large paintings, and I had this big table, and I moved the painting around the scanner to make I don't know, it's hard to describe. It's like there was a hole in the table with a scanner, a really good, at the time, 15 by 20 scanner. And I moved this painting around kind of in a way that I could do like this corner, then the middle corner, then and so it was like 30 little pieces of an amazing sharp scan. And then I would have this, I knit it all together. And then I had this Roland printer, but it wasn't, I wasn't using chemicals. I was just learning how to print this thing on rag paper. These prints they looked like original. They were so beautiful. But I loved the process of doing it. And just, I could work on the color. I learned to adjust colors and change it. And I noticed that, color is a huge part of your work. And I'm wondering, does that happen in the printing process, or are you, like you said, that yellow figure from the Falling Through History series, that was, you painted a yellow background, or how do you just make your own color? When does this color come in?
So the backgrounds are a lot of them are from magazines in the film noir, and the figures. But in the single figure images where there's just a flat background, those are all from color aid paper, which is, this is my great secret, that you can buy a box of 314 different colored pieces of paper for, they're expensive, $300 or something for 1114, but it's a lot. It'll last a long time.
But it's so small. It's so small. How are you using it?
No, that's the thing. That all of the things I'm working with are only that size.
You're kidding. Oh my God. It's so funny because you're the third artist that I've talked to in the last 3 months that has talked about that color aid paper. I love that stuff too. I use that, I had this color class when I went to art school. So yeah, that paper is so beautiful. That box of just hand painted or whatever, it's sprayed. But so your work, when you make it, it's like tabletop in a way? I mean,
yeah, it's tabletop.
Wow. I had no idea.
That's the thing that's so cool, is that you get this illusion of this grand scale. It's not at all. It's like, it's tabletop. And but Color Aid does make 2024 paper.
Really?
Oh my God. I'm not sure they do it anymore. But I do have one box, but it only has like 100 colors or something. 80, or I don't, maybe you have to get it custom. I don't remember. But so yeah, that's a possibility. But I'm not sure they still make it.
Yeah. And everyone always says, yeah, it's damn expensive, but blah, blah, blah. It was always like, at the time it was like $300, way back when. Your work feels so monumental when you show it, right? You're showing it. Like, what sizes do you show this? Like, you're represented by Dolby Chadwick, I think. Like, when you have a show, what sizes do you like to show at? Well,
Dolby Chadwick's wonderful because they love 40, 50 prints. Which, and it's like more is more. It's like the bigger the print, the bigger the price tag. So I love working with them. So I print, when I used to be color printer, I taught analog color printing at ICP for 20 years. That's the thing. So I print there. I printed at ICP all the time. And I would print 2024. And then if I want a bigger print, sometimes I print 30-40. But mostly if it was 30-40 or 40-50, I'd send it out. But I would only, print that big if I had a place for it to be. like a sale or a show or something like that.
Yeah,
for my
right.
own work, for my own portfolio, I print 2024. And now, unfortunately, I have to print 1620. That's as big as I can on an inkjet printer, the inkjet that it's practical.
So you can do your work anywhere. You can be in Greece and
Yeah, so, I can do it anywhere.
Oh my God. Wow, that's remarkable. I mean, it's funny because you talk about like, well, this seemed hard, so I went this way. And you've got to kind of like, there's an ease to, like, if I think about what you're doing and the fun you're having, like I do a lot of work, 12 by 12, small paintings. Yeah, I teach all these workshops and everything. And I love it because I don't have to walk around. I don't have to spend all this money on paint, and I can have just as much fun on this small space, you know. But the fact that then you can take these small images and just blow them up is wonderful, you know. And you can, I guess, do it when you need them, obviously.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that you're kind of hitting on something that is true. That I am, you know, it's not really a minimalist, but I'm pretty minimalist. And I'm super Yankee frugal person that, you know, I like things simple and I don't like things to spend money. And, you know, so it does seem like it fits my personality to be able to, you know, make all this stuff and this kind of, I'm not a large person myself. I'm like 5'6.5". I like small. Makes sense. That's sort of small, sort of minimalist, sort of fits my worldview.
But there's kind of a Buddha like, you know, it's like the Dalai Lama with they do that test for the Dalai Lama that there's like a fancy bowl and a medium-sized bowl and a really just plain bowl. And the new Dalai Lama, who's, you know, the test to see if this child is worthy, one of the tests is this child has to choose the right bowl, which is the very simple, beautiful, just simple one. You know, there's a sort of simplicity to your work. I mean, you're not dealing with, you know, it's just straight up one image on a background. I mean, like your Buddha images. Can you talk about just your spirituality or how you see the world, how this comes into this work? Because I can feel it, and you write about it so beautifully. The mandalas and the work you did, you know, you said with your father, the apparition work.
Well, you know, when I was younger, my life ended up being kind of a mess, and I had a spiritual awakening of sorts when I was in my mid-30s, and I kind of started over again at that time, and that's where I got some basis in some kind of sense of the spiritual, and that kind of grew into ways to think about, you know, how to make art that would answer some of the questions that I was asking myself about, you know, existence and you know, the big subjects.
You're implying something that's greater. The work has a feeling of bigness, of universality, of there's an invitation in the work when I look at it to inquire. And I don't know if what you just said is because of your own inquiry, because of your own, wow, how am I going to remake this life, and where am I going to go, and what is the meaning of this and that? And I think, you know, that kind of inquiry comes out of challenge. I know for myself, my work took off once I had a train wreck in my life, you know, and I lost everything and, you know, all my money and blah, blah, blah. And it calcified what I was doing. I don't know, but so it's felt in the work. There's a sort of meatiness to what you're showing. I mean, so that's interesting.
I guess I started my life over at age 35. And so I was, with a clear mind, I was asking all the questions that probably a lot of people had already asked a long time.
Yeah.
Growing up or something. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. When people see your work, like I know, like I've had experiences like this, but what is it? What lights you up when they connect with it, and they, you know, what are some feeling or, you know, stories of people that see in your work or connect to it? What are they connecting to? And how does that inform what you're doing? And does it reassure you?
As long as they don't say, "Oh, you have a broken camera," I'm happy. So you wouldn't believe how many people say that.
You are shut up. No.
So I don't know how to answer. I respond to this. That I think that it's like my work's not for everybody. Some people really don't seem to connect to it, and a lot of people connect to the color. And I don't know. People say, "Oh, I love your work." That's, to me, that's like just wow. That's really great.
Yeah.
It's but I think it's only the only ones who are feeling that way are the ones who are saying that. And I think that a lot of people are walking by going, "What the fuck is that?"
Yeah.
And, so I think it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
But I think there is a connection that somehow it happens. A certain amount of people just actually they really like it a lot.
Yeah. And I know that, you were saying you wanted to be a writer, but I love your writing with your art and what you're saying. It's rare to find someone who can articulate in words and imagery. And so I love that. So I don't know, you mentioned you're doing some more writing now. Is that true?
Yeah, I am. But let me just say, I really appreciate that you say that. I mean, I really try to be real in my writing and not speak art speak. And I spent like so many hours. I spent like a whole year on each of those starter statements, because it takes usually like a year to do a portfolio and get it out in the world. And I spend so much time working on those artist statements and paring them down. And it's such a challenge. You got one page. That's what you got. You got to make every word count. And I do really get into it, and I do appreciate it.
Yeah, I do a lot of writing. I'm learning to write, and have a book proposal and the whole thing. And I just I've copied those because I help a lot of people. To try. I work with a lot of artists, and I too can't stand these artist statements that are trying too hard and just descriptions of work. And you just walk that line so beautifully. I mean, it really. I will put these in in with the notes for this episode so people can read it, and there'll be links to your website and everything. But so they went. I just copied them, and I'm like, oh my god, this is so good. Yeah, so that's I can tell it takes a long time. You probably spent longer on the words than you did some of those images.
That's true. So A.D. Coleman, who's the critic who was quite famous some time ago, he had this art speak generator, which just generates.
Oh, really?
It was really hilarious.
Yeah, that's what we all need. One of those. My God. So where do you think your work's heading? And we're going to kind of wrap this up. But like, what are you excited about, and what's coming for you? Do you think? What are you kind of thinking you want to do next?
I really am going to work this fall on trying to get the Falling Through History project out into the world, because it was just shown online at Clamp Art, and it hasn't really been out in the world. And I really would love to see big prints of that and stuff. So that's a project. I did a book called Quarantine: Artists and Writers in Isolation, about the pandemic, about the history of artists and writers writing about the plague and isolation, stuff like that. And that has been available at through the Photo Review, which published it. But right now their website, I'm not sure if it's back up because it had some problems. But
okay, well, we'll get links to that.
That was a really good thing that I worked hard on. It was really pretty good. But that led me to this other thing that I'm now doing. It's called Random Acts of Courage: Portraits of Heroes, Martyrs, and Activists. And it has a collaged portrait of a person that's made in digitally. And it's somewhat blurry, but it's not nearly as blurry as my other work. But it still has a feel of ephemerality, and it still has a feel of a collage not being a collage. And I've combined it with written biographies, one-page biographies of these various people who are just the most extraordinary people I could come up with through research on the web. And I put that together as a book, and I've just sent it. I have an agent, and just been sent out, so we'll see if we get any takers. And so I've been working on that. And that's a pretty cool thing. But there's nothing to be shown because right now it's not.
Right.
It's a PDF that I'm not, I'm waiting to see if someone wants to publish it. So I'm not, it's not on my website or anything.
Yeah. Wow. That's exciting.
Yes, that's what's been keeping me busy. So, but it's very different. It's not really even in the Infinity series, although it kind of could be. And I'm doing that with a friend of mine, Nina Rothschild-Utney, who's my co-writer on that and co-author. So that's the main thing I've been working on. I'm thinking about starting a new series in the Infinity series right now, but I don't know exactly what it would be.
Well, listen, just before we wrap this, I just, you've got this huge trajectory you've been following and recreating yourself and all the things that you mentioned. For people wanting to, I get a lot of listeners who are trying to figure out their direction and where they're going. Some are photographers, some sculptors, some don't know, some aren't sure. And I love this sort of, what's maybe one or something that is really helped you a lot or that you've learned over the years that just was a big game changer for you? I mean, I know, your friend just teaching you photography, but, is there any sort of thoughts as to what might be really, really helpful for somebody?
I just got a random thought. I remember reading Robert Polidori was asked he's a photographer of architecture and ruins, and he was asked well, what are your influences? And he said Bob Dylan, and I said, yeah, listen to Bob Dylan. That's what I would suggest.
I think that's great. That's fantastic. Yes, totally. Thank you so much, Bill. It's just been a real pleasure. And I'm just so excited about the work you're making and your words in particular. It was really a beautiful surprise to click on those images and to read all your descriptions of your work. So we'll provide links to all that. And thanks so much. Hey, thanks for listening to the Art to Life show. If you enjoyed the podcast, please help me get the word out by sharing it with your friends on Instagram at @arttolife_world. The recording of this and all episodes, along with a place to leave comments, see additional photos, and discover a whole new approach to making art, can be found by going to arttolifepodcast.com. And secondly, if you could leave a rating and review in whatever app you're listening on today, I would super, super appreciate it. It makes a big difference. And last but not least, before you go, if you'd like to be on my artist list, every Sunday morning I send out a video blog all about art making. Go to arttolifepodcast.com to sign up. And all these links are in the show notes, of course. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you next week.